Hi, kids. Welcome to Chapter 7 of It's a Mistake by me, Neil Gilfillan. My name is Junior. I live on this street, John Mellencamp. Tom brought Panna headed to his cruiser and headed for Karos's heavens. Panna climbed until he could clearly see the human fleet and began snapping pictures from numerous cameras around his cruiser. He spoke into his Uniapps recorder as he maneuvered. There's a force of maybe 75 or 6 ships firing upon the smaller Karos party. But more ships are now coming from the surface. Who is this invading force? Nobody knows for sure, but it could be a place on which some Karoslings died. It's been deemed violent, and this is most certainly violent. The invaders are reaping serious damage to cities as well. Some kind of weapon that looks like a red-nosed pill with rudders. It explodes into a huge umbrella of fire. This is nuts. Panna deftly averted one of the weapons flying toward him, taking many pictures as it passed, and watched the thing drift out to space with his back eyes. He shook his head in puzzlement, releasing his bangs while recording the fight. A squadron of Karosling ships now rose to join the fray. Within 15 minutes, the human fleet had been reduced to half its size. They were far more nimble than the larger Karosling vessels, however, and buzzed around them. Humans scored many hits, taking out a number of Karoslings, but were finally overwhelmed. There simply weren't enough of the humans to win. Suddenly, space blurred before the Karoslings. The humans were gone. Karos's fleet scavenged some of the invaders' disabled ships, destroying the others, and towed them back to their planet for research. They had some explaining to do about how these beings were able to inflict so much damage. What do you mean, we lost? President Mulberry thundered from across his desk. The Resolute, named after a British ship that got stuck in Arctic ice for 2 years and, after being rescued by an American ship, refitted by the American Congress, sailed back to England as a token of peace to Queen Victoria in 1856. Put in service for 20 years, retired, and turned into a desk in 1880 for U.S. presidents to command from behind. I sent 100 nuclear-loaded spaceships, and you tell me we lost? How is that possible? He had only just gotten his morning coffee, made a short prayer for guidance, and was hoping to watch a grandson of Jerry Falwell preach on TV. Now the day was probably shot. I'm told they responded with massive ships, even bigger than the one that landed on our lawn. His chief of staff, Arnold Smith, stood in front of the Resolute and pointed a thumb south. Our soldiers say they were overwhelmed. It's my lawn, and I was told by the planners that 100 ships would be more than enough. I thought the metal was supposed to be impregnable. Yes, sir. Apparently not to those who have the same metal. Well, what do we do now? Smith sighed. That's up to you, sir. Mulberry looked around as if his next step might be found on a scrap of paper that fell to the floor. Okay, he said, while retrieving the clean white sheet with thick black lines across most of its surface. Mulberry set it down on his shiny desktop. The maid had polished it this morning, and he clearly saw his worried expression. Call an emergency meeting of the Joint Chiefs. Make sure that Air Force guy is there. Okay? Yes, sir. I'll get right on that. Smith waited a full 10 seconds. Okay, they're waiting in the war room. President Mulberry looked up surprised and said, Good work, Smith. Thanks. He then stormed out. Smith rolled his eyes upward. He wondered if this guy had a clue about anything. In the short time Mulberry had been in office, he dismantled most of the government. Many offices of lower rank, like CDC investigators or anyone needing congressional confirmation, sat vacant. Nearly every institution that could be eliminated had been. Important people ran around trying to find enough loyal friends of Mulberry or religious ideologues to fill jobs in those that couldn't be eliminated. Smith's wing of the party wasn't so puritanical, and while he liked smaller government, felt this might be too much pruning. Congress blithely approved those few appointees sent their way by this wartime president and kept silent about ignored domestic problems. Things like shoddy maintenance of the renewable energy grids or damage from severe storms, which were now common. Nothing seemed to bother the president unless it first bothered his vice president, Sean McInnes. Because they feared Sean McInnes, it didn't bother the Congress either. President Mulberry pounded through the war room doors and took his seat at the table's head. The standing generals waited until the president looked up startled and told them to sit down. So what are we going to do? Well, sir, we were thinking a larger fleet might be sent. You said this was going to be large enough, President Mulberry said pointedly. Yes, sir, but we didn't anticipate the degree of resistance. 100 nuclear-loaded ships on our world would have been an invincible force. Well, it wasn't on theirs. We have to continue the attack because they are most certainly going to come here now. There were numerous agreements around the table. We have 200 ships left, another 40 still in orbit, more being built as we speak, so that's a lot of ships. How about we send up another 100 to join the first already out there? The Joint Chiefs looked around at each other, each slowly nodding their head except one. The Naval Chief, Dan Nolte, felt we should risk all 200 ships. He felt our best chance to beat them, if we could beat them, was while they were concentrated in one place. After they get here, they'll be spread out and very hard to target, Nolte strategized, and time is not on our side for that. We need to be very serious about our efforts. President Mulberry said he'd considered this strategy before making his decision later in the day. They joined hands around the table, and the president led them in prayer. There was an old song that resonated for VP McInnes. Its verse went, "Everybody wants to rule the world." This was certainly true of Sean. Sean McInnes Jr. had started life in a poorer section of Indianapolis. Not the poorest, but close enough. His parents worked 2 jobs, service positions which didn't pay much or offer many benefits, and barely got by. Their busy workload didn't leave much time for Sean, so he spent most of his nights studying. As he grew, Sean developed an unhealthy envy for those who had means. He coveted their Christmas bounties, summer vacations, and big screen televisions for watching the latest movies and sports. It had, and never would, occur to him that what Sean desired most was having parents around. Sean walked home alone, past green lawns and colorful houses with people inside them. His house had a neglected porch and dead grass. It sat quietly between a noisy street and a nosy neighbor. Sean let himself in and made himself dinner. Sean despised his house. Sean tried gaining power over his conditions by beating up other kids for more lunch money. This worked until another kid fought back. Sean got beat up pretty badly and decided this wasn't the best way to gain power. He then tried befriending the other kids, but that was difficult. It took a lot of time, energy, and faking interest in them. Sean didn't give a damn about them, and it showed. It was in the 8th grade that Sean learned something valuable. Adults had lots of power. Sean began serious efforts to gain adult friendships. He adopted a somber demeanor, developed a certain intellect, and listened to them. Adults loved it when someone listened to them. Teachers began seeking his help in class and tended to take his side in disputes. Sean learned how to gain power by standing behind those who either had it or could get it. In high school, Sean got a job as a congressional page, became a lobbyist after college, then a political advisor, and finally a representative. He first heard of Lucian Briggs very soon after becoming a page. Sean heard senior senators badmouth Briggs, so began paying attention to Lucian. When Briggs killed the alien, Sean damn near fell in love. It was an election year, and that act inspired Sean to run for the House. As a lobbyist, he'd bought stocks with every available dollar he had, gained many friends among corporate board members, bribed or blackmailed congressional members, and became quite wealthy. Winning wasn't a big problem. Sean's best friends worked for weapons manufacturers, energy suppliers, and military support services. His favorite was a fairly new one named Briggs Multinational. BM's CEO introduced Sean to Briggs during an inordinately lavish party celebrating the CEO's 4th wedding. They sat together discussing strategies for their mutual goals and quickly became close friends. Sean had just begun his 2nd term when Lucian invited him to the Western White House. Lucian revived the name by casually dropping it around visiting colleagues. Briggs introduced McGinnis to a freshly elected senator from New Mexico who drank too much but had potential. "This is your project, Sean. Nurture it, treat it well, and tell it what you want it to hear. When it grows up, you might have something I could never get, a president." After those many years of grooming Harry Mulberry for a presidential run, patiently managing Mulberry's press exposure and guiding him through Washington's halls of real power, McGinnis acted surprised when offered the 2nd spot. He was positively giddy when they won. Sean McGinnis finally had power over everyone. At last, he could take everything away from them. McGinnis now sat waiting outside the Oval Office in front of Harry's secretary. This formality galled McGinnis. Despite the obvious truth, Mulberry still believed that he was actually in charge. Mulberry had twice told McGinnis that the Oval Office was his domain. This conceit meant that certain formalities had to be tolerated, so McGinnis held down his anger in order to continue manipulating the little bastard. Sean swore that after Mulberry's second term, only 3 major war presidents had ever lost re-election: Polk, Pierce, and Bush number 41. Together they formed a sex act. Was over, he would find out to whom the Oval Office really belonged. President Mulberry finally returned from the war room, clapping VP McGinnis's back as he led them into the inner sanctum of world domination and briefed McGinnis on their discussions. 48 ships are gone. What are we going to do, Sean? McGinnis smiled at the fact that this twit was asking him for help. He had skillfully piloted Mulberry into striking the enemy first, and now looked to McGinnis for leadership. Priceless, McGinnis thought. Fearing that Nolte's advice could shorten the war, McGinnis had to nullify his ability to offer it. Our fleet's not large enough to risk half of them. All of them are out of the question. That's a stupid idea, and you should fire Nolte for even suggesting such a thing, Mr. President. Good point. Replace most of those we lost. What was it, 48? Replace 40 and send the whole team back. McGinnis thought of money that would be made by replacing lost ships. For those profits to continue, the war would have to last a while. Maybe we'll amend the strategy, though. Sean McGinnis met with their Secretary of Defense, a dapper, short-tempered man named Derek Murkay. McGinnis had first studied under Murkay's tutelage, but now McGinnis was Murkay's boss. Derek Murkay was a bit of an ideologue. He truly believed in obedience to a president, but wasn't averse to mixing idealism with profit. While McGinnis and Murkay's reasoning wasn't always the same, their ends often were. Only a bit of patriotic nonsense was needed to bring Murkay along. They decided on a strategy of surround and evade. A few ships would take up various positions around the alien planet and launch a concerted attack against its cities. When confronted, they would simply try to evade the aggressors in any way possible. Being smaller and more agile, that seemed possible. They both delivered this strategy to the president, who in turn told the Joint Chiefs. They informed the on-site commanders. Phrases like, "you will do," or "we want you to," gave the distinct impression that little of this plan was open for dissent. That impression was reinforced when generals learned Naval Admiral Nolte had been fired. Information concerning the war was fed to the media and regurgitated as public nourishment. It was absorbed that way also. Americans were ready to kill anyone who disliked President Mulberry or disagreed with his decisions. Murkay's military carried out the plan with spectacular results. So many Karosling cities were lost that their defenses collapsed almost entirely. Great ships had been sent up to stop the offending weapons, but in some cases, where only one human ship had infiltrated a sector, were unable to even find the attacker. In other cases, Karosling ships would disable the humans only to be destroyed when the crippled human ship slipped up under the Karosling craft and exploded. A Karosling ship might repel a nuclear missile, but couldn't survive a detonation directly underneath it. Commanders got word of this back to Earth, and McGinnis ordered drones be built, each carrying a 1 megaton bomb. For remote piloting, Being a one-way craft with no human crew made them inexpensive and quickly produced. They soon became the backbone of Earth's special strategy. While the United States had started this hostility, it was now everyone's problem. Prime ministers, kings, and dictators knew the Karoslings weren't going to differentiate one nation from another when they came to exterminate the loathsome bugs that bit them. Karos's problem was Earth, and all nations would be destroyed by their rebuke. A central command was mandatory for creating strategy, assigning missions, processing intelligence, and making big decisions. While few liked it, they handed over this authority to President Mulberry, the U.S. being militarily strongest. Their nations anteed up weapons, people, and money. Many chief executives noticed that President Mulberry's vice president seemed much more vigorous in attending to details of this conflict, but they shrugged it off. How could they impugn the president's abilities during the most dangerous period of Earth's existence? A period in which he had been given authority over everyone's military. To question who was in charge would call into question every leader's own judgment. If the questions began to resonate, then everyone could lose his or her office. With their abdication, Sean McGinnis had become untouchable and unquestionable. That was just fine with him.